persistent rumors that all of you have been writing about, that some version of Build Back Better, or what we call reckless tax and spending, is seeking to make a comeback. From looking at what you all have been filing about these discussions, it appears as if they want to target businesses they don't really understand, which are pass-throughs. The vast majority of American businesses are not incorporated. They pay as individuals pay through these companies that employ an enormous number of people. Just to pick out four kind of random states out of the blue, in Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona, just to pick a few states, 58% of the private sector workers are actually employed by pass-throughs. In New Hampshire, just to pick another state out of the blue, 61.7% of the employees in New Hampshire are employed not by corporations, but by pass-throughs. And in West Virginia, just to pick another state out of the blue, in West Virginia, a whopping 95% of businesses are pass-throughs. 95% of the businesses in West Virginia are pass-throughs, and about 58% of the employees. So what are they looking at doing here? First, they overstimulated the economy by dropping almost $2 trillion on the economy last year. At the time, Larry Summers and Jason Furman said this is going to create record inflation, and it did. And now they want to pour fuel on the flames by making it more likely that we go into a recession by raising taxes on all of these businesses, the vast majority of businesses in America, which will only cause them to reduce the number of employees. So that's where they're trying to head, and I would continue to ask those who may be negotiating this if they fully understand the consequences of what they think they're about to do.
Well, inflation remains the number one issue for the American people, and I guess it shouldn't come as any surprise since it's at a 40-year high. And everything that the American people purchase today is going up, up, and up, starting with gasoline, food, grocery store. You can go right down the list. Inflation is crushing the American people. And as the leader pointed out, a lot of this got started when the Democrats decided to pass a partisan, party line only, $2 trillion spending bill last year, which flooded the zone with lots of dollars and created a situation where, as the textbook defines inflation, too many dollars chasing too few goods. And so we've got rampant runaway inflation. The American people are paying the price. And what is the Democrat prescription? To double down, to spend more, and to tax more. At the very time when the American people are facing the possibility not only of perhaps even higher inflation numbers come out tomorrow, but 8.5%, as I said, is already the highest in 40 years, but also the possibility of a recession. We actually could be at a time when the economy, we're experiencing negative GDP growth. So the Democrats want to tax more, want to spend more. That's their solution for how to deal with rampant runaway inflation that is being felt on a daily basis by the American people. And so as the leader pointed out, one of the ideas on the table right now, if you can believe this, is let's stick it to the small businesses. Pass-through businesses in my state of South Dakota represent 99% of businesses. And what they're talking about doing is a tax increase on the very small businesses that create the jobs in this country and that we're hoping will pull us out of the recession. And what do you do when you raise taxes? Well, first off, it contributes to inflation, because when businesses are faced with higher taxes, they can do a couple of things. They raise prices, right? That's how they pass it on to their consumers. They also pass it on in the form of lower wages to workers. So you're going to punish workers, you're going to punish the American people with higher inflation by going after small businesses. That's what this reckless tax and spending spree is all about. And as was alluded to, there is a study out there now by the Joint Committee on Taxation that has assessed the many ideas the Democrats are putting forward in the form of tax increases and concluded that it doesn't just hit people who make more than $400,000 a year. In fact, the Joint Committee on Taxation, bipartisan, obviously a referee, if you will, umpire of tax policies and their implications on the economy, pointed out that people who make between $100,000 and $200,000 dollars a year, 50% of them would see a tax increase. A quarter, 25%, would see a tax increase if they make between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about higher taxes on the American people, higher taxes on businesses, higher prices, and lower wages. That's the Democrat prescription. And the American people have had enough, and I hope that there are a couple of wise Democrats who will sink this really bad idea and make sure that we don't go down a path that leads to even more economic tumult than the American people are already feeling.
People all around the country have just lived through the most expensive 4th of July in their lives. This year it costs about $100 more a week to get by than it would have cost last year. And that's just to keep up. People across the country, you ask them what their concerns about. It's the cost of gas. It's the cost of groceries. They're the #1 concerns of the American people by a whole lot. I ask people in Wyoming, what is it that you want? And they'll tell you. They want enough money to be able to afford to actually fill their tank with gas, to actually buy a full week's worth of groceries at the store, and to have money at the end of the month to pay their bills. Joe Biden doesn't care about all of that. All he's talking about is raising taxes, billions of dollars of additional government spending, and giving speeches attacking American energy. That's why the American people are furious, and his poll numbers show it. So where do we go from here? Well, the president is going to Saudi Arabia. He's going to ask for more oil to be produced by the Saudis. The president actually wrote an article, an op-ed in the Washington Post about why he was going to Saudi Arabia. That's what he said. Why I'm going to Saudi Arabia by Joe Biden. I'll tell you how he's going to Saudi Arabia. He's going as a weakened president. Weakened at home in America and weakened on the world stage. Why is he weakened? How much is he weakened? The American people give Joe Biden, in terms of right direction or wrong direction for the country, only 13% of Americans say we're heading in the right direction. That's because Joe Biden has taken us from energy dominance to energy dependence. He's given away the strength that we had as a nation. I would tell the President of the United States, we have more energy and better energy here in the United States that you're going to find anywhere else. Just let us get it out of the ground. He and the environmental extremists who run that administration won't allow it to happen. So what do the Democrats want to do instead? Well, he and Chuck Schumer are going to try another desperation Hail Mary pass, trying to get this Build Back Biden to rise from the dead with billions of taxes, billions of spending. It's going to add to inflation, and the kind of taxes they're talking about on the energy companies is going to make the pain at the pump even worse. There is not a single Republican who is going to vote for this reckless tax and spending gimmick.
So Senator Ernst and I were part of a bipartisan delegation of 7 senators who went to the Nato meeting in Madrid. We did that to advocate for 2 things. One is the expansion of NATO and the addition of Sweden and Finland, and 2 is whatever it takes for Ukraine to win. The expansion of NATO is the most successful alliance in history, 73 years old. 2 countries that will make a big difference in NATO have managed for 73 years not to join NATO, but Putin did what was necessary to get them to join NATO. It makes a big difference in the Baltic. It'll make a big difference in the Arctic. We talked about the Arctic more in the last 5 years than we have in the previous 25 years. The Arctic would now be NATO-controlled countries with the exception of Russia. Every country that touches the Arctic would be a NATO country. We need to do everything we need to do here to set the standard, and the United States needs to approve this agreement that lets these two countries come in before we leave here in July. Every other country in the world that needs to approve this, every other NATO country, needs to see us wanting to be and successfully being among the leaders in the world on leading to see that this happens. There were people from Japan there, obviously not part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, people from Australia that we had a chance to meet with, people to talk about the importance of alliances. The loss of former Prime Minister Abe in Japan is the loss of somebody who really understood the importance of the Indo-Pacific, and Japan, Australia, working with us, working with India, are prepared to look at the lesson of Putin and not let that become a lesson that China benefits from or that China wants to move forward because of. And this is an important moment. It's an important moment for the United States to lead, and certainly I'm urging and we're urging the majority leader to get this on the floor. It will get 90+ votes, I'd predict, and that's an important signal to send not just to our NATO allies, but to the rest of the world.
Iowans are still feeling the pinch of inflation, and all Americans are feeling this hurt. And just recently, I've heard stories about folks that are actually taking their goods, their jewelry, their electronics to pawn shops so they can get additional money to pay for gas. You know, this is really hurting the American people. And those pawn shop owners, one in particular in southwest Iowa, said that folks are just volunteering forward, that, you know, they don't have to say why they're pawning their household goods, but they are telling him that they need it for gas money. This is what Iowans are resorting to. Their wages are not keeping up with inflation, and we have an administration right now that simply doesn't care. And what is the Democrats' response to the economic hardship that not just Iowans but all Americans are facing? Is to raise taxes on them. They're pushing this reckless tax and spend bill all over again. Let's hike up taxes as we're facing a potential recession. This is not what Americans need right now. They need real leadership. Couple of easy solutions that I hope the Biden administration and the Democrats will act on. 1, stop spending money. 2, unleash American energy.
Since Biden got elected, this is what's happened to inflation, 1.4% to 8.6%. And they basically acknowledge that tomorrow when we get the CPI numbers, it's going to be worse than this. Now, we are hearing stories from everybody about what's happening in their states. In my state, I've got a lot of retirees. Many of them are delaying their retirement or coming back to work because they can't afford it right now. They can't afford the gas, the food, the rent that's gone up. You've got families that are going to food banks that had never gone to food banks before in their lives. You've got people taking second jobs all across our state. So it's happening in all of our states. And the latest is they're talking about now raising taxes on people. Well, you know, if it impacts an individual, it takes money right out of their pocket when they're already struggling, so that's horrible. Then you think about business. I was in business. What happens when they raise your taxes? Well, you can either raise your prices, that's inflationary. You can have fewer employees, that's bad for the economy, right? What else can you do? I mean, if you can take profits out of the company, but if you look at what's happened with the pandemic, profits are down, profits aren't up. So the Democrats' idea to raise taxes and spend more money, all it's going to do is make this number continue to go up faster and faster and faster, hurt our families, or it's going to make sure we have fewer employees.
Yeah.
Leader McConnell, you've made the threat against USICA. If the White House continues to push reconciliation, would your party be able to provide enough votes to get closure on the lead sector USICA, even with reconciliation around the way?
Yeah, it's a complicated situation. You're familiar, it's a very large conference. You may recall that the trade part of the Senate-passed USICA bill was the key to passing it at all. In other words, there were not 60 votes there to pass the Senate version of USICA without the trade portion negotiated by Senator Crapo and Senator Wyden. The House doesn't seem to like that. The conference is stuck. And so it seems to me there are a couple of ways out of this, potentially. There is the possibility of the House simply taking the Senate bill and passing it. That did not include a majority of Senate Republicans, but 19, I actually voted for it after the Crapo insertion. Or there is a widespread concern on a bipartisan basis on the CHIPS portion of it. Another option would be to spin off the CHIPS part of it and pass it. There are members I have who are not overly fond of USICA, but who think there's a national security aspect to the CHIPS deficit. So as you can see, it's extremely complicated. And then at the same time, they're trying to do what we've been talking about here this morning. Add it all up, if it all happened, another $1.5 trillion on top of what's already been done. That's why we're in a conundrum here at the moment. But there are other ways to deal with USICA, or at least some version of it, and we'll see what lies ahead. Yeah.
It was reported over the recess that the former president is considering launching his 2024 campaign before the midterms. What do you think about candidates for president launching their campaigns before the midterms?
Look, it's a free country. We got 330 million people, and who knows who's going to start talking about 24. It seems to me the American people are focused on 22, and ought to be, because that's the next election. And they're going to send an important signal about which way they might want to go in 24 in November of 22.
Mr. Leader?
Yeah.
Have you been following the January 6th committee hearings in any way? And if so, what have been some of the takeaways for you personally?
I tell you what I've decided to do on that issue is wait until the committee reports and then make my observations about it. Yeah.
And the senators can also comment on this. So obviously you guys bring up the concern around dollars for Americans, how they're spending so much because of inflation. One of the things that Democrats have brought up is actually overdraft fees from banks, wanting to help diet down and bring that down for Americans so few dollars aren't taken out every time they end up going over. Do Republicans agree on this stance? Do they think maybe it's time to do with?
I don't have any observation about that. Anybody? Yeah.
Supreme Court justices are facing new harassment from groups that are actually getting bounties for being able to tell them and tell the organizations where they're at. Your feeling about that and the Biden administration just not even arresting one single person yet?
It's absolutely appalling. Appalling that even the president can't bring himself to focus on security for the Supreme Court and for our judiciary. It is currently against the law right now to picket in front of private homes of federal judges. We have been constantly communicating with the Attorney General saying, what about enforcing this law? In addition to that, the Chief Justice indicated to us a couple of months ago that he needed some enhancement of current law in order to provide security for the families of the Supreme Court. We passed it on a voice vote in the Senate. They sat on it for a month in the House. Look, the majority seems not to care about the independence of the Supreme Court and even the physical security of the Supreme Court. This is outrageous. It's a separate branch of government. They're entitled, under the law, and because it's the right thing to do, to carry out their functions without being daily threatened. this was like an open invitation, and we all remember that somebody showed up in front of one of the justices' homes with an apparent intent to kill him. I find this alarming. What do we hear out of the administration? Darn little. I think it is way past time that we started showing the Supreme Court the respect that it deserves. I would remind you, when I was the majority leader, I never went over to the front of the Supreme Court, singled out members of the court, and said, you'll pay a price if you rule a certain way. Have I been happy with every Supreme Court decision over the years? I haven't. But I think it's appalling, the lack of concern the administration and apparently most Democrats in Congress have for even the physical security of federal judges.
Speaking of court, under judiciary, there's 10 narratives.